economic transformation and inclusive growth. He was speaking at a press briefing ahead of the World Economic Forum's Africa leg set for Durban next week.
The stage is set for the country to once again sell itself as an investment destination next week. But investors remain apprehensive about what exactly the term radical economic transformation means for their investments as opposed to inclusive growth. Treasury's new leadership suggests the two concepts are the same.
It talks to all the citizens of the countries being part of ownership of the means of production. It talks about beneficiating the primary products that we have, so that we add value to our goods before we export them. So a short answer, we are very clear that it definitely there is no difference.
Buthelezi says R1 trillion worth of infrastructure tenders must be dished out so that many people benefit.
Let's also be deliberate in saying that a certain percentage of this work is going to be done by small and medium enterprises, women companies, youth companies. It is an established economic fact that small companies have got more propensity to create jobs than big companies. So we need to do that with the budget, with what we are doing.
At the center of the 27th African leg of the World Economic Forum are discussions on inclusive growth and its benefits.
There is a concern that the pursuit of growth has not translated into the benefits that citizens are expecting. A lot of frustration with systems not working for people, not enough jobs, deterioration in living standards, and pressure on leaders to become more responsive and responsible to their citizens. And in Davos we interrogated what that means for the leaders. How can they do things differently, helping them to understand the failures that citizens are complaining about.
1,000 delegates, including several African leaders, will descend on Durban next week. Devin Murrigan, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Cabinet says that it did not discuss the country's economic outlook in its first meeting since President Zuma's cabinet reshuffle. This despite the country being downgraded to junk status by two rating agencies following that midnight reshuffle. Communications Minister Ayanda Dlodlo briefed the media in Pretoria this morning.
Feedback on the first cabinet meeting following President Zuma's cabinet reshuffle. The reshuffle itself not discussed. Credit ratings downgrades not discussed.
Cabinet welcomed the new ministers and it ended at that. So there was no discussion around names and why the reshuffle had to happen. On the credit ratings, Cabinet did not discuss the issue of credit ratings. The Minister for Finance was not in Cabinet. And I think issues around the financial outlook would be discussed at the next cabinet when he is in attendance.
Turning around the fortunes of the financially strained SABC was discussed.
There is no financial bailout. There is no discussion about a financial bailout. The discussion is about assistance to the SABC, which might not emanate in a financial bailout.
On the Hawks' arrest of a man allegedly plotting to assassinate cabinet ministers and the president, Minister Dlodlo says cabinet does not have much information on the matter. Sipho Stirman, SABC News, Pretoria.
Now, the rand has bounced back from a one-week low against the US dollar. It was trading at 13.28 to the dollar a short while ago, from 13.34 in previous trading sessions. Economists are saying that dollar strength and risk on the back of US President Donald Trump's comments that there is a major chance of conflict with North Korea sent the dollar-rand exchange rate to a high of 13.38 before retreating somewhat this morning. Let's take a look at other economic stories that made headlines this week.
This week, Stats SA released the producer price inflation figure showing it decelerated to 5.2% in March from 5.6% in February, lower than market's expectation of a 5.6% rise. Economists expect producer inflation to remain subdued in the months ahead as the effects of the drought dissipate. They say the biggest upside risk to the PPI outlook is the rent volatility. Stats SA data shows liquidations increased by 16.8% or 27 more cases in March compared to the same time last year. Private sector credit expansion growth slowed in March, indicative of the tough economic times. Reserve Bank data shows both consumers and businesses lack appetite for credit due to the depressed business and consumer confidence levels. Credit growth slowed to an annualized 4.95% in March, its weakest level since November. Motorists will have to pay more for a litre of fuel from Wednesday next week. The price of petrol in Gauteng will increase by 49 cents per litre on May the 3rd. The wholesale price of diesel will increase by 32 cents per litre and that of illuminating paraffin by 34 cents per litre. This will likely add to inflationary pressures and could hit the consumer's pocket hard. Next week, South Africa will host the World Economic Forum in Durban, bringing together businesses, governments and civil society leaders under the theme Inclusive Growth. South Africa will also be celebrating Workers' Day on Monday with the main May Day rally being held in Bloemfontein. Gloria Sefakomosi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, shares in the Gupta family-owned Shiva uranium mine remain unchanged at 18 Rand, despite the ruling of the Western Cape High Court that the pre-agreement signed by South Africa with Russia and other countries regarding building new nuclear plants is unlawful and unconstitutional. The decision followed a legal challenge by environmental groups. Shiva Uranium was positioning itself for rising uranium demand and prices if the deal went ahead. Oak Bay has kept its sights on South Africa and other countries with plans for nuclear build programs, saying that it expected a 48% increase in global demand for uranium by 2030. Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute and Earthlife Africa succeeded in their bid to challenge the legality of the nuclear procurement process. They claimed that South Africa was secretly preparing a nuclear power procurement deal. They argued that the decision to procure nuclear energy could bankrupt South Africa, especially since much lower cost options are available, such as renewable energy. Earlier, SABC spoke to Lucas Warwick from Galileo Capital on today's market movements. And we started by asking him how the equity markets are doing with investors taking their profits at the end of the week.
I think that's pretty much par for the course that we'd expect. Although it is month end, sometimes month ends do see a slightly stronger market than usual, and perhaps it'll make for a slightly different Friday trend.
Okay, and then looking to the European Central Bank's decision yesterday, they decided to keep interest rates and their quantitative easing policy the same. So they're still continuing to support that economy with lots and lots of cash, and that's despite the fact that they say that they are seeing that the EU economy is beginning to improve. There seems to be an addiction to QE when you look at the European Central Bank and the Japanese Central Bank.
Yes, it certainly can seem like a bit of a drug. I think what is important, however, in order to maintain that kind of economic momentum that we're seeing, is you also have to maintain a consistent environment that underpins that. So what that means is, well, sure, QE is probably not necessary. However, in order to give some kind of sense of continuity and to keep this fragile commodity called confidence up, you keep maintaining the environment and slowly withdraw that. So I think that's what we'll probably see over the next 18 months from the ECB and the BOJ.
Okay, and then let's look at the US. Donald Trump's administration unveiled those very dramatic tax cuts for corporates down to 15% from 35%. Very dramatic indeed, but the market's not very excited at all. Why is that, given the fact that if it does get to be passed, it means quite a lot of money in corporates' hands, which means potentially more investment for the economy?
Sure. I mean, on paper, that would be the scenario. I think, though, the markets have definitely come around to the opinion that, unlike Teddy Roosevelt, Donald Trump really talks loudly and carries no stick at all. So we have the situation that, well, we now have a tax plan that doesn't even have a border tax, so they don't have the means to balance the budget. It's more out of whack. Moreover, we don't have a revision in health plans that would also balance the budget. So the question is, well, are they simply going to open up this great big hole in the federal budget?
But do they care? I mean, one of the things that people of your ilk always say, well, the US prints its money, and for them it doesn't really matter because they're the world currency.
Well, yeah, but you can't go to the point of, say, Zimbabwe in terms of printing your own currency, and I think that's where some of the hawks in the Republican Party are going to be holding back their own team.
Do you think that President Trump is going to see through his first term, let alone see a second term?
He's proving to be relatively ineffective as a politician, and I think that's his political style has to adapt if he's actually going to see the yards.
We've seen a lot of up and down with the local currency. Seems to be the norm these days. To what extent is that a dollar story or local factors at play?
A bit of both. I think there's been some speculative buying on looking for the rebound story within SA. I think for the rest of it, though, the currency and bond markets are starting to follow the devilish detail much more closely now. So, for example, we might have seen a little bit of strength courtesy of the court ruling in Cape Town in the last few days, vis-a-vis the nuclear power station. So I think we're going to find that our rand will be quite choppy for some time.
Okay, and then let's take a look at a couple of companies, assuming we have time. AngloGold Ashanti making an announcement that an exploration venture that it's invested in over the past 14 years in Colombia, they've had to bring it to a stop because local communities there voted against continued mining in the area. I mean, that's a massive loss. What does that mean for this particular company, which will have invested a lot already?
Absolutely. Look, to put it in context, the company's probably put about $900 million into Colombia in the last 10 years, of which about a third you could allocate to this particular project. That said and done, the Colombian government has already come out on record as saying that the poll is not considered legally binding in any way, but clearly what it does mean is that AngloGold has a PR problem in terms of rehabilitation, environmental issues and so on, and they are going to have to engage with the local community to some degree.
So after having spent 900 billion, a third of which was on this particular project, do you walk away?
No, they definitely wouldn't be walking away. I mean, the vote itself is not legally binding.
All right. And then Barclays PLC, based in London, announcing a doubling in profits, although European markets not too impressed by them because they didn't do very well relative to other banks. And they talk about having to make an £884 million write-off in relation to Barclays Africa, which they want to ultimately get rid of. But there don't seem to be any buyers for it. What's your view on that?
Right. Well, as far as the actual write-down goes, because it's now classified, and by that I mean Barclays Africa is classified as a for-sale asset, it means that its value gets written up or written down depending on how the share price has performed in sterling terms. So, of course, we saw in the last quarter banking stocks in South Africa generally took a pummeling. The rand took a pummeling. Net effect is a large write-off for Barclays UK, but it is a technical write-off. As far as the actual sale of Barclays Africa goes, there's still some regulatory hurdles to clear. So I don't think they've put a line through this one at this stage.
Right, now taking a look at the market, starting abroad. Asia was a little weaker on the back of President Trump's comments on an existing free trade pact with Seoul to the payment of a sophisticated anti-missile system. European markets closed lower with company earnings in focus there. Meanwhile, US equities tonight are trading lower as investors digested economic data and key corporate earnings. Here at home, the stocks on the JSE were mostly higher at the closing bell, although smaller volumes because of the holiday, and the overall index rose by 0.5%. And as we noted earlier, the rand is steady, bouncing back from a weak low. It was trading at R13.38 to the dollar at the market close.
What is environmental health?
In Section 24 of the Constitution, the environmental right has a second part.